All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We'll let people get logged in. We have a lot of questions that were sent in advance, and I've seen some comments coming in, some other additional questions. We'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So if you want to, feel free to, if you're watching this live, if you wanted to, feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. If you're watching this afterwards, you don't have to do that. And also, in the past, some people have been really incredible in keeping kind of an index of topics as we go through them. So if someone wants to keep kind of in like a notes of different topics, that would be great that we could share so people could jump to particular questions. But we're going to get people logged in, get your questions answered, and then we'll go ahead and get started. If you're watching this not live, you may want to fast forward 5 or 10 minutes as we get everyone logged in and questions started. But we'll go ahead and start collecting questions. Thanks. All right, so we have Dusseldorf, Buenos Aires, India, England. All right, so we have Maryland, Chile. All right, so we have Quebec, we have Iowa. All right, so we have Germany, Texas. All right, just copying over questions that are being submitted. All right, so we see Tony Ray Jones from Nashville. Good to see you. We have Italy present. right, so just collecting some more questions. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Thanks for all the wonderful questions that were sent in advance, plus the ones that we're getting in the comments field. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, so people from UK, people from Greece. So I see a quick question. Can I open a Mac project on Windows PC? Yeah, the Cubase projects can freely be moved around in between either platform, so no issues there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see if there's any last minute questions that pop in. If not, we'll get started. Okay, so the first question that we had mailed in was regarding kind of using the Steinberg UR44 interface and how that's kind of, and what the concept of the effects bus was on there. So when we go to the UR44 interface, if we have our audio connections, one of the great things about like the UR242 and higher is that when we have kind of like an input defined for our audio interface, let's say if I'll just define a couple of inputs here, and we go to our mix console, that we could actually just, if you have the racks available here, there's going to be the hardware setup. So if we go to our input channels, we can now come here to our hardware setup, and we could have built-in RevX reverb. So this is a fantastic sounding plugin. And this is actually powered from DSP on the hardware unit itself. So we can monitor with this for our inputs in real time, and we could also have different effects for, our, whether you wanted to have guitar amps or different morphing channel strips. But what the question was is when we go to our VST connections or our audio connections in 9.5, we often see kind of on the output side this function here that shows up as effects bus connections. And there's a lot of confusion on what exactly this was. So when we monitor by hitting F3 in our mix console for our inputs, we use the onboard RevX reverb for this. And we also have this available as a plugin because a lot of people may want to just simply access that as a plugin. So if I came here and if I wanted to just go to an insert, one of the plugins that you would see, let me just switch that to my default. Under reverb, once you have those plugins, you can now just open that up, and this would be powered off of your computer's processor. So if we wanted to use the send audio to the onboard DSP, that's where we would use the effects channel bus. So when we come here to our audio connections, I'll just go to my outputs, and I just added a RevX, and now we want to shoot this directly over to our reverb. So what this is going to do is send it to the hardware reverb, and it's going to kind of assume the settings that we had before. So if I had a saxophone part here, and let's go to my sends, let's say we'll play back. So we'll have that dry, but now what I want to do is I'm going to just send it to the RevX. And as we do this, I'll just solo this again. And now this is actually being sent directly out to our RevX reverb. And you get some control of it. As soon as you come here to the audio hardware setup, you could choose whether you want it to be the room, so now when we have a connection that's sent to the effects bus, that goes directly to the hardware reverb so that you don't have to take any computer processing power. And you could also have the option of using the software plugins for that as well. So it could be a little confusing, but this way you could kind of use software or DSP assisted. So if you have kind of an older system, or if you wanted someone to be able to monitor without any latency latency using the onboard DSP can make a big difference. And again, that is just kind of set up. I just set up an output, or you could add an effects channel and be able to add your effects channels directly there and have that routed to basically the onboard DSP. So that's where that can make a big difference. All right, so saw a question come in about, when will Cubase be able to send audio to a virtual instrument? Let me just read it real quick, make sure I have it correct. So is there an ETA for audio being routed to different virtual instruments? So that already does exist. So if I wanted to just take I'll just do a new project here, and I'll just add like a retro log. So some of the instruments already supported, like Hallian uses this for internal sampling. So if I just wanted to now come here and let me just find like a quick drum loop of some kind. So once you have this, you could now just activate the side chain. At this point, we'll just put this into a quick loop. Sorry, let me just unmute this. Okay, so what I need to do now is I could send this instrument, I could send my kick directly to this audio file, directly to the output of the side chain. So now we could send this directly into Retrolog. We want to make sure that this input is kind of turned on. And for Retrolog, we want to make sure that we pass MIDI information. At this point, if I have done everything correctly, I can now kind of run the audio directly into the virtual instrument. Let me just make sure I have. So I will just load up a different preset, but you could hear as soon as we do this, I'll just take my input and you could hear the drums being fed directly into the instrument. I'll just turn my drums up here, make it a little louder. And you could adjust the different oscillators that you wanted to. So just kind of come here. So you could already send audio directly into virtual instruments. So in Retrolog, it's just handled directly here. So you could see kind of the input stage, what you wanted to do with that. And then you could have, you know, control over your different filters that you wanted to. And as we just kind of hit play, so as soon as I hit play, that way the audio is being sent directly to the VST instrument. So the ETAs, it's already been going on for 15 months. I think it came with version 9. So all right, just copying over some more questions. All right, so I see a question of like how to transpose in Cubase 9 elements. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So there's a number of ways of transposing. So say I just want to take this bass. So if you actually just select an event here, you could choose to have it transpose. Directly from the info line here. You could also transpose so if you want to adjust panning, you could do that. But there's also, if you go to MIDI, you could just choose to do transpose setup. And here you could also from within the editors themselves, you'll have, let's say for here, and you have events selected, You get the info line, and here you could actually just adjust the pitch. So a number of different ways of transposing. You could also kind of do it from the inspector area as well. So if you go over here, we could say, let's go to your MIDI modifiers. And here you could also just transpose. So there's a number of different ways of transposing. Some people will just simply also select notes and move it up or down using like the arrow keys. So if I'm here in my particular parts, I could actually just use my up down arrow keys to move MIDI notes and transpose that way as well. All right, so we had a question about using the pool. So let me just reread the question here. So it says, I can't use the pool. I don't see any MIDI song information. And second, I can't use the algorithm function. It doesn't appear in the main page. So the pool doesn't really have anything to do with audio, or, you know, what the pool is kind of showing all of the different audio files that are being used in a particular project. So I have a project open here. Let me activate it. So say we have kind of a more of a kind of traditional jazz piece. I'll make sure I don't kill you guys volume wise here. So let's say as we're playing. So when we now go to our media menu and we go to our pool window, we can see all of our audio files that are being used directly in this project. So if you have a project that's all MIDI, nothing is really going to show up. It's only files that are used in a particular project. And I often get the question, what's the difference between the pool and like Media Bay? So Media Bay is, you know, going to show you all of the projects, all of the audio files, plug-in presets that are on your computer system, whereas the pool is only going to show all of the files that are being used directly in a particular song. And you could kind of scroll over, and there's, you know, some people miss kind of different functions of, you know, here you can see exactly where that audio file is stored on your computer's hard disk. You could see also, you know, the different algorithms for time stretching, if it's in musical mode, what the origin tempo is. So I've never not seen the pool work, but again, the pool is only going to really function for MIDI information, or for audio information rather. And it's not going to show any MIDI parts or the song title. You will see kind of the folder, but it's really only intended to show audio files that are being used in a particular project. So if you're looking for MIDI and different song information, that might be not the place or not the tool to actually search for with that. All right, so we had a question about MIDI settings and MIDI learn, and this kind of is coming with a Yamaha. Let me just make sure. I think it's with a Yamaha motif. All right, so it's just saying can't get the MIDI learned function from the motif that's connected via FireWire to work with Cubase. So let me just open up a virtual instrument here. So let's jump to like a retrolog. All right, so depending upon the virtual instrument itself, so virtual instruments will handle MIDI learning separately. So a lot of them you could right click like on the retrolog here. I'm just going to say learn CC. And now I could move my knob on, I have just a Yamaha KX controller. So at this point I could just learn, just right click. And if I wanted to forget to CC, so let's say I wanted this particular envelope, let me just, sorry about that, start my Cubase again. We have some Wavelab questions that were sent in, so we'll go through those. In just a couple minutes. So we have Wavelab open in the background. So again, we'll just kind of find a particular instrument, drag this over. So a lot of functions will just be kind of like a MIDI learn. So again, right click, learn CC, move a knob, and then you could adjust the different parameters, and doesn't like that particular MIDI parameter. Sorry about that again. So that's one method of doing it. Now, another method that people will use is doing quick controls. So, you know, if the plugin itself, and that's up to the design of each particular plugin, but if the plugin itself is set up to do that, you can just simply, you know, move any of the knobs on your controller or keyboard, like your motif, and at that point be able to go to town. Now, another method that sometimes people use when using a different instrument, let's say I have Hallian Sonic SE, we can drag that over. And if I wanted to have a particular instrument open, a lot of different instruments will respond to quick controls, and we could think of these as kind of 8 go-to parameters, and we could access these quick controls in a number of different areas. So on the inspector, we can just click right here and see our 8 quick controls, and we could reassign different parameters for quick controls. So if you're here, you could just send that, assign that to automation, or assign directly to a quick control. And then you could do the MIDI learn functionality. So as soon as we go to your studio setup, you'll have your quick controls here listed. So as soon as you go to like your VST quick controls, and now you can have the same kind of 8 knobs on your motif or your MIDI controller keyboard, controlling the quick controls for all your different instruments. So, and then you could do the MIDI learn function directly here and have that work as well. So, so not every plugin will allow you to immediately assign it. So it could be up to the plugin, or you could assign the different parameters of plugins to quick controls and have those. If you have like 8 knobs, you can have those 8 knobs automatically kind of work with your favorite go-to parameters. Okay, so we had a question about someone having a hard time loading up a project that had more than 2 instances of Mystic and Prologue. So let's see if we can. So the sound gets very metallic. So let's go ahead and just load up 2 instances. All right. Okay, so let me just go to Prologue as well. So then let me just go ahead and load up something completely different, and we'll have this. And let me just do kind of like a pad shop. So we're saying it kind of got the, a distorted metallic sound when loading these up. So I'm not experiencing that, but if you if you have a project that you wanted to send me with where you're kind of replicating that, you could email to me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. But give that a try. But it doesn't seem to be doing it on my end. Okay, so we had a question that someone recently took advantage, I think, of the Valentine's Halloween 6 special, and then they're getting messages that not everything, that there's perhaps missing files. So let's say if you kind of start off Halloween here, get it loaded up. All right, so we can just simply kind of come directly to your file browser. And if you wanted to, you could kind of see all of your, in the VST sound, you could see all of your, basically all of your different content sets that are available for Halion. I've seen sometimes people do a partial install and maybe not get all of the different sound libraries downloaded. So you could check if you did a download to make sure that the files are the same size on your download as is with the actual download size, to make sure that they match up. Something else that you could do is if you go to your media bay, at this point we could just if you go to the lower left hand corner, you could just activate and see your file browser. And at this point, you could just go to VST Sound and make sure that you should see all of your Halion content in here. And you may just want to just kind of go through the different folders and just rescan the discs, and that will look for any other presets. So, but often once, I see a lot of people get a partial download, so check that. But if not, just go to your media bay and then, make sure that if you click in the lower left-hand corner that you have the file browser and that you go to VST Sound and see if it's listed there, and just do a rescan and it'll probably show up for you if it's been installed. All right, so we had a question regarding the channel batch export. So let me just open up a project. I would kind of make better use of that. And the question was, they just wanted to export the audio tracks and being kind of cognizant of the like group channels and effects channels. I'm just going to reread it one more time just to make sure I'm understanding everything correctly. So if there's any setting, so if you wanted to take your project and be able to kind of render it easily to hand off to other people, or for archival purposes, if you kind of go to your file menu to export audio mix down, so here you could choose to do like I want to take my whole project and mix it down as a stereo file, or if you activate the batch export, you could just say, I want to take all of my output channels, I want to take my group channels, my VST instruments, my audio channels, my effects channels, and I could have these all rendered as equal length audio files or stems. So, if you wanted to just export all of your audio files independently, that's fine. A lot of people would want to include all their groups so they have kind of, especially if you're doing different effects on groups, like if you're doing parallel processing, that's handy. Now, the one thing to be kind of cognizant of is sometimes you may want to have a combination of mono or stereo files. And if you wanted like your monos, let's say if you had like a vocal or bass to be rendered as a mono file and your stereo tracks to be rendered as stereo, this is all kind of determined by the output routing. So as soon as you go to, let's say, our full screen mix console, and you'll see the routing up top here. So you want to just make sure that, it could be set to a stereo out if you want it to be a stereo track, or a mono out if you want it to be a mono track. The VST connections don't have to be defined. It's just kind of looking for the output routing. So if you wanted your mono tracks to be exported as mono, simply go into the channels for mono tracks and switch the output to a mono destination and a stereo destination for tracks that you want to be stereo. Those are the things you just have to kind of watch out for that I've gotten calls on. So if you do that, you'll probably be in good shape. But the batch export's a fantastic feature. So you get a question, why can't we export the audio mixed down as MP3? Wave works fine. So it could be, depending upon your version of Cubase, that when you go to export audio mixed down and we choose the file type, due to licensing agreements, depending on your version of Cubase, I think Cubase Pro comes with a full MP3 license. But previous, like I think Cubase Artist and under, you may have to buy an MP3 update patch. So I think you get like 20 or 30 free encodings, and then you may have to purchase an additional licensing patch for that, and that cost is kind of rolled into Cubase Pro version. So so if you can't export to MP3, you just check out the Steinberg MP3 patch, and especially if you're not running Cubase Pro, and then you should be all set with that. All right. So question is, how can we get the scroll bar to stop at the locator, at the marker? So let's say if I'm here and we're kind of playing our song and we're near the end and we just wanted it to stop at the end of the marker here. So let's say as we do this, we'll zoom in and I have it set to cycle back. So, but if I come here, let's say I want it to stop right here. So at that point, what you could do is there's a key command, or you may be able to access it from the transport. But let me just, so if you come here, we can say under key commands, and there's a function for, I think it might be under transport or markers. Play until next marker. So if you define a keyboard shortcut for that, so let's say if I have this set to Control Shift Spacebar, let's see if that's being used for anything. Okay, so I'm going to assign that. So now I play, triggering that key command. All right, so let me just put a marker here. Just going to open up. So let's say I just put a marker directly here. We'll insert a marker. Okay, so we'll just call this end. And see if this functions as expected. So you can see that now it just stopped at the marker. So all you have to do again is go to your key commands, and then there's play until next marker, and you can have your own keyboard shortcut set up for that. All right, so we had a question, how can I create a full CD from the projects I've done in Cubase? Cubase itself doesn't have CD burning, but we make a program called WaveLab, which allows you to do CD burning quite easily. So there's kind of a WaveLab Elements, which is kind of $100-ish bucks. It could be different depending on your state, and then there's a full version of WaveLab. You can check the pricing with your dealers. But as we wanted to come here, we could just say let's do a new, and then you choose to do we'll create a basic audio CD. We could add tracks. So let's say if I just wanted to add a couple tracks here, it could automatically put the markers in for us. So let's say I'll just kind of come here. All right, so now at this point, you could burn the CD directly from here. And you could burn the CD or DDP image, or you could actually turn it into like an audio montage. And then if I just kind of come here, now I could see kind of all of my song files laid out for me. So so Cubase doesn't really offer that functionality, but it is offered directly in Wavelab, which is kind of our audio editing, mastering, CD burning program. So that's probably the best choice. And one of the cool things you could do is even, if you just, as you complete a project, you could just come right here, and when you do your export audio mix down, you could now just say, open directly into Wavelab 9.5. And then that would automatically open up the file for you in Wavelab, launch Wavelab. And there's kind of a two-way communication. So if you needed to change something in the mix in Cubase for that file, you could edit and basically go back and launch that file, that the project that was generated that file, launch that directly back into Cubase and make a tweak and re-export if necessary. So Cubase doesn't have CD burning functionality, but Wavelab is a phenomenal audio editing and mastering solution used by many of the top pros in the world. Okay, so we had a question about kind of being able to replace different samples. Let's see if I may have a project that's kind of set up for this. Just take a quick look and then I'll just make one. All right, I'll just create one from scratch here. All right, so there's a really neat little trick if you wanted to, if you had like all of your kick drums, which is the kind of the case here. So okay, so let's say maybe and you could do this with kind of any number of files. So let's say, if it's an audio file or a drum loop, it'll kind of function the same way. So if I wanted to, let's say this is just an individual kick, or if I want to take like another loop and just replace it, if you just hold down the shift key and drag on top, it'll ask you, do you want to modify all events that refer to that same material? If you say all, they'll now all be replaced. So anytime that one particular audio file is being used, hold down the shift key, drag over top, and all of those audio files that reference the same material, if you wanted to, can now just be replaced that easily. So if you have like just a kick that's been done, let me just find. So say I just have like a kick pattern here that's on 1 and 3. So at that point, if I just want to replace it with a different kick, drag it over top, hold down the shift key, replace all, and then you're good to go. So from any of the media bays, drag it over, hold down the shift key, and when prompted, if you want to erase all of the files, say yes. All right, so we had a question regarding gain staging. So this is always, you know, a zillion different concepts on this, but the one big one is to, excuse me, make sure that you do have, you know, some headroom. It's really easy sometimes for people to get carried away with a lot of gain staging and trying to make things loud, and not really kind of setting up your gain staging correctly. A lot of people I know try to record at -6 or -12 dB for the input signal. So that's a common method that a lot of people will do. In your meters, now there's different metering types. So, you know, you could have full kind of digital scale, and you have kind of a control room. So a lot of people get mixed up when they think of their master fader as being kind of their monitoring volume. So in Cubase Pro, we have the ability to kind of separate these two. So we have in the control room, and you could set this up by going to your audio connections, and I highly, highly recommend this. And at that point, you could just say, you know, this could be your monitoring volume, but that doesn't affect the gain structure of your mix. So a lot of people will get those two kind of confused, and it's a bad habit to be in. And also, we could use a kind of a known reference level. So a lot of people find that mixing at a consistent reference monitoring point is very good, and they're not kind of altering the gain staging, you know, of their monitoring source and their software source. Now something that's also very handy if you go into the meter tabs is a loudness meter, and we could have this set up for kind of different structures. So I think Spotify now, they want mine, and this is a loudness unit or a LUFS unit. So what a lot of people do for broadcasting is they go for -23 loudness units, and -14 I think is what Spotify is using, because there really hasn't been a monitoring standard. So depending on your delivery source, you know, if it's going to be for streaming, Spotify is obviously incredibly popular. You could have different thresholds here that are really set up. But a lot of people, I know some people that try to mix in kind of traditional analog with analog gain staging, and find that they just pull the master fader down 6 dB, that it translates very well if you're kind of acclimated and used to that particular workflow. But, you know, using kind of the loudness meters that come with Cubase are very helpful for that. So depending on exactly what you're delivering for. So if I was doing something for broadcast and I didn't want it altered, I would probably want my meters to be roughly peaking around -23 and -14 for Spotify. And kind of knowing what the delivery format is can also be very helpful. But those are some ideas to kind of help get you started with gain structure and gain staging. So seeing a question about the IC Pro and having the locators maybe like a half a bar off from where they are on your system. I haven't come across that, but make sure, just out of curiosity, if you go to your project setup, if you find it to be kind of consistently off, if you go to your project menu or your project sub menu here and go to your project setup, make sure that you don't have anything for offsets, like a display offset or a bar offset. And just make sure that you don't have anything set up in there, because the display offset might cause that. But I haven't come across that myself. So. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. I'm just reading through some comments here. Bear with me just 1 second. So, same question: when I have the control room set up, like the scrubbing and all is routed to it. And is there a way to choose the output for the offline processing? So it's really gonna kind of just mimic wherever it's gonna be routed to your control room. So if you're not familiar with this, a lot of times people will call me up and like in Cubase Pro, and they're like, I'm scrubbing and I'm not hearing anything because, again, it's kind of set up the control room functionality to do that. But, the control room, you have 4 different monitors, and you could choose your monitors to be routed out to anywhere. So I think even if you're in the control room here on the right-hand side, that if you wanted to go to different destinations, that you could just choose different monitors in the control room. Information like scrub, I believe, will be, I don't have multiple monitors set up here, but will immediately kind of get routed to wherever that is set to. So at that point, if you wanted it to automatically go, scrubbing directly to a different speaker, you could just select a different speaker or define a different speaker in your audio connections under your monitors. So you could define, instead of one left, one right, two left, two right. And that could allow you to just simply route to the two different destinations. I don't think you could have the main control room going out of one location and the scrubbing out of an independent location, but you could choose to basically just have the location of the control room output defined from your VST connections. So I think we have a question back to, and I'm seeing a couple comments that volume is low on the audio from Cubase, so I'll turn that up. But so the question referring back to routing the audio inputs or audio into VST instruments, it would be the case that the third-party company hasn't implemented that functionality. So I think in your comment you mentioned Arturia, so you may want to check with Arturia if they're planning on doing that, but it is possible within the VST specification to do it. So you may want to just comment with, touch base with them and let them know that you would like to see that functionality. So I'm seeing comment when updated to Cubase 9.5 that the meters seem out of sync. I think I may have seen some comment maybe on a Facebook group with that. But also when you go into the metering, you could check the meters peak hold time in the fullback. You know, you could check to make sure that those are kind of set up correctly. But I've seen a comment on it. I'm not sure if it's something that might be addressed, but I haven't really run into it. Sometimes, you know, the meters can be responsive to the latency. So if your latency is set really high for your audio interface, you may want to see if altering the, decreasing the buffer makes a difference for you. So, but give that a try and see, and also check the metering preferences for timing. All right, so I see a comment about please let us have the auto aligning functionality in Cubase, please. So right now I know it's in Nuendo. I'm not sure. I haven't heard of any plans to put it in Cubase. I think it would make sense, obviously, to do it, but I haven't heard of any plans. They've obviously just released, Cubase 9.5 just a couple months ago, so I'm sure the developers are, actively always working on things. But it's a point that I've stressed to them and have passed on. So, but I'll reiterate it once again. So, unfortunately I'm not smart enough to be a developer, and I can't really make those things happen, but I'll pass on the feedback that it's a feature that people are wanting. So I'm seeing a comment, just if there's a way to have a key command to automatically insert automation points. I'll just reread it one more time. Okay, so the question was, I'm going to select one bar and put that automation on minus, basically to nothing to minus 50. So I just recently had a video released on the Cubase channel. Let me see if I have this this macro incorporated here. Okay, so I don't see, but you can. It's not necessarily with automation, but you can set up a macro. And there's just a video released on kind of how to minimize breaths macro. It's on my Q&A series videos. But one of the things that you could do is, basically you can set up a macro to, split. And what this macro does is if you have kind of breaths, you could just kind of select a particular region and then using kind of this, knock it down so many dB. But one of the key commands that a lot of people miss that's kind of critical is let me just find the key command. All right, so there's an increment. You could also just do a decrement event volume function. So you could set up a macro, and if you I kind of have the whole video, if you watch it again, to minimize breath macros, but you could just simply assign this, and that would drop it by 1 dB every time. So if you just put in a macro to drop it 50 times, you could do that. So if you kind of watch the minimize breath tutorial on the it's on the Cubase YouTube channel, that will probably allow you to create the macro and be able to do that. So while it's not automation, I think it'll accomplish the same thing. It's basically using clip gain instead. But that's kind of an easy way of doing it. All right, so we got a question. Can you import EXS24 instruments into Halion? I believe you can. I used to be able to. Let's see if I could find it. But I'm pretty sure you can because I have like all my EMU libraries and my Kai libraries. I'm probably not going to be able to find it, but I'm pretty sure you can import the EXS24 is a pretty simple format to import, but I may have to dig up where to do the importing of it. Let me just... Sorry, I'll have to look that up. But I'm almost positive that you can. And if you want to email me after, I could have an answer of where to go in Halion to have the import of the XS24. All right, so we had a question in Groove Agent. Is there an option to switch the phase of samples? Let's take a quick look. I'm not sure if you might have to just do that inside of Cubase. Yes, I don't know a way to flip the phase inside of. Let me just take a quick look. Just see if there's a. Yes, I don't know of a way to flip the phase inside of the sample editor, but you could do that obviously within Cubase and then drop the sample directly into the file as well. So. All right, so we had a question about using kind of the tempo detection and maybe having to modify some of the different settings. All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of the tempo detection. So I'm just going to select an overhead drum track here. Let's get to project and to tempo detection. Okay, so excuse me. One of the things that you may notice is that this stays open when you do a tempo detection, and it switches to the time warp tool. So if we wanted to look at our tempo track here, and let's say that we find that maybe at a certain point the tempo detection got off, what you're able to do now is to just take the beat here. So as we see, kind of these represent the different beats, and we could move the beat to kind of the new location where we think where we feel that the beat is. And at that point, it's going to automatically recalculate it does a reanalysis of the tempo from that point forward. So if it got off on, I had a guy who does a lot of remixes, is doing an old disco track, and there's one drum fill that the drummer would do that would really kind of throw it off. So every time that drum fill came, he just had to take this, where Cubase kind of calculated the tempo wrong, and then at that point he just did it after every time that drum fill was kind of re-recorded on tape. We could just simply just do that, and then it will automatically do the tempo detection afterwards for you. So you should be kind of so don't close this window. If you close that window, then you have to kind of do the whole process again. But as soon as you do the tempo detection, that's why it kind of gives you the tempo warp tool, so that you can tweak it if necessary to have that aligned on the beat, and then have it recalculated from that point onward. So that's why it kind of puts you in that position. A lot of people, it's like, oh, why did it switch tools and do this? And that's the intention of that particular function, so that you can listen to it, make a tweak, And as time has kind of gone on, there's been with every version, there's, improvements to the tempo detection, but obviously it's not absolutely perfect. I remember at the NAMM show last month, someone came and I think they had, Cubase 9 and they couldn't get two particular like really free-form jazz things to do the correct tempo detection, and they just loaded up the files on my laptop, and with 9.5 tempo detection just kind of nailed it. So there's always tweaks to that are going on, but again, just simply kind of come right over here and just tweak where it is off with the time warp tool, and that's the tool that's automatically turned on after having done the tempo detection. All right, so we had a question: when using UR44, is there a way to increase the volume of the monitoring volume of the input channel? I'm just going to reread this for the track being recorded when it's in direct monitoring. So I think if you increase the gain here on the input channel, that will take care of it for you. But when you're in direct monitoring, it's kind of basically passing the input from to the output, and it's kind of going through so it could be instead of adjusting the monitoring gain, that you adjust kind of the your headphone monitoring system. So it could be using more of the control room for headphone routing, but try adjusting your input gain volume here. And sometimes people will use and just monitor with the compressor with the morphing channel strip. And with the morphing channel strip enabled, people could, get more gain that way as well. All right, so we have a question on sound clicks on start and stop and playback. One thing to check, is let me just is just to make sure, like in the sample editor, that you have play from zero, that you have zero crossing activated. I've seen some audio interfaces that don't, so you could also try the snap to zero crossing function here. So, and this may be related to DC offset as well, which we will discuss in a little bit. But make sure that you have the snap to zero crossing, and that may take care of that for you. So just this little icon here. So if you're having little pops and clicks at the beginning of a file, that's something to check out. All right, I think this is perhaps a comment on the going back to finding the content for Hallion 6. So if it's not showing up there, one of the things is check to make sure that it was kind of like, sometimes people will just download Hallion and not all of the content But if, so it's like, 20, 30 gigs of content. But if you're not there, you could also, if it's not showing up in the VST, so let's say we go to our media bay, and if it's not showing up in the VST sound, you could just go directly to your computer and then, where you installed the sound content to. So it could be under like your preferences. And here you could manually add the folder where the content was installed to, and then it may show up. So it could be the same concept here of just saying, okay, this is the folder I need to be, so have it rescanned. And I'll just remove that for now. So try doing that, and make sure that I'm not sure if you installed all the content. Sometimes people just install the plugin without the content, so that's something to be aware of as well. All right, so we had a question: what's the difference between the color tool in the inspector and the color tool above here in the toolbar? So let me just revert this very quickly. Okay, so this color tool on the side is only going to be kind of for the track settings. So if I come here, this color tool will allow me to, switch the color. So if we look at my kick track here, which is in red, so if I want to switch that to blue, and we can see this kind of represented directly on the side. Now we can't do this for multiply selected events. So if I wanted these all to be yellow, it'd only do one at a time. And this is what the color tool will allow us to do here. So if I have multiple parts selected, using this color tool, I could change the color of multiply selected parts. This would also allow me to have independent colors. If I wanted to have, let's say, colors for, an A and a B section, I could just come here. So let me just, let's say I just did a cut here. I'll just select these events. So if I wanted to colorize these all to be like those events to be red, these beginning ones to be yellow, at this point I could use the color tool to just say, okay, I want my intros to be yellow, my middle parts to be orange, and my ends to be red. Or green, so you can make it very kind of Christmassy if you wanted to. So the color tool here will allow you to colorize multiple parts, individual parts, as well as parts, can have multiple colors depending upon arrangement. On the side, that would just allow you to color one track at a time. So those are some of the differences between them. So I'm seeing a question: is it possible to have tutorials in Spanish? I could check with So, you know, I'm not fluent in Spanish by any means. I understand a little bit of it from school, and but I could check with some of our counterparts, like within our Mexico team, or maybe within our European team, where I could provide the tutorials I do, that they might be able to overdub them in Spanish. You might be able to also have, I think on YouTube, you know, you could have the language automatically translated in closed captions. But I'll see, you know, I'm happy to give my content for people that, if, you know, but I could check with our organization and see if they could use it for other languages like Spanish. All right, so we had a question when using multiple about when using kind of multiple parallel paths. I mean, what's the difference between using a send versus a direct out? So I'm just going to reread it here. Okay. All right, so let's set this up real quick. Let me just make this a little louder. I'll just do like a groove agent here real quick. Okay, so let's say all right, so let's say if I want to set this up for some parallel processing. All right, so I'm just going to just drag this over here real quick, or I'll just record it directly in. Okay, so let's say I have some drums recorded in. All right, so I'm just gonna cut and we'll just kind of loop a particular section. Okay, so now one of the big differences between kind of setting up, you know, direct routing, so if I want to go to my mix console and setting it up for versus direct routing, can be, especially with monitoring. So let me just gonna hide my input channels here. So, and what I want to do is in my racks, we're gonna make sure that we have our direct routing and our sends on. So we'll say sends, and let's go ahead and I'm just gonna add like 2 group channels. Okay, so now if I wanted to, I could take this drum and I'm going to route it to, let's say, group 1. So this is really handy if I wanted to do for instance my channel strip. Okay, I'll just do it from a quick insert here. All right, so on this, I wanted to have, let's say, just a quick, just do vintage compressor here. All right, so if we have this, you know, if we have this track going out to, let's say, our stereo out, and we use sends, it could be really hard to actually monitor the send individually. So when we get into here, we want to make sure that we have the direct routing summing mode on. So if I now take this particular channel and we send the audio out to, again, to group 1, I could send it to both groups here for parallel processing. So let's say we just kind of swamp that. So sometimes the ability to monitor the different sends here, so being able to monitor each of the different sources can be a little harder using send. So if you do the direct outs at this point, you could send it to both destinations and be able to monitor each of those independently, where sometimes doing that via sends is still not allowing you to get both of them monitored independently. So that's why a lot of people tend to go towards direct outs for parallel processing. All right, so seeing a question on working with video. Do you want a particular point in time to be bar 1? So let's say this is, instead of having negative bars, so all you have to do is if you go to your project setup, so just kind of come here to your project setup. And then you could just simply do your bar offsets right there. And I think that if you wanted to, there's also within the project, like you could also set time code positions at the cursor. So if you wanted that to be 0, so at that point you could just kind of do, so experiment with the project setup. So again, we just go here to your project setup and don't hit the wrong thing. You could just come here and just do your bar offset directly here. So moving the cursor to specific time code position, there's a key command for that. It's going to be under transport. I forgot what the key command was. So Shift P. So as you can see, if you look right here in the transport, as soon as you hit Shift P, then you could just enter in the time code value, just like that. So just make sure I read the question correctly. All right, just reading through some comments. Just bear with me 1 second. Thanks for everyone's great questions. All right, so question, what's the use of different mix consoles in Cubase? Often what you can do with the different mix consoles is to have different particular types of tracks handy. So let's say if I go to my mix console, my main mix console here, I may only want to see, and let's say if I had a number of different audio tracks. So let's say I had 24 audio tracks. So when I go to this mix console, you could actually have different configurations. So this way I may want to only see audio channels. My next mix console, let's say if I go to mix console 2, for this mix console I may want to see only input channels. Like if I was doing a live recording, I may want to only see my available input channels to adjust gain during the recording process. And mix console 3, I may want to see only VST instruments, instrument channels, sampler channels, MIDI, and group and effects. So this way, each mix console can highlight particular types of channels. That's one way that a lot of people like to use it. Some people will have mix console 1 for, channels 1 through 50, 50 through 150 on mix console 2. So you could also choose to see different types of tracks or different tracks in different mix consoles, but that's probably the most common use, is to filter out particular types of channels. So here I only want to see my input channels. I only want to see my outputs and effects or groups. So that's a very common use of why people like to use more than one particular mix console in your project. All right, so we covered this a little earlier, but how to invert the phase of drums in Groove Agent. What I would do if I had a bunch of drums, and I don't know of a way to do it inside of Groove Agent. I'll take another look just to see. I'll see if maybe it's in the full version of Groove Agent. Just take a quick look at the sample editor again. So we kind of discussed this a little bit. I know that the delay in time the question was asked, but I don't think there's a way of doing that. But if you do have different drum samples in your project, so let's say if I come here, because none of the presets are going to come with any phase issues. But let's say if I just come here and I had a crash, kick. So let's say if I just drag these all to one particular track, and I have my different samples laid out for me here, what I would do inside of Cubase is just to take those particular samples. So if these are all my samples and they were out of phase, or if I wanted to flip their phase, before I built the kit, I would just go into the direct offline processing and just say I want to take those, and we'll do a phase reverse. We'll make a new version of those files and then drag those to the various pads in Groove Agent. So the fact that you could just take your, processed audio files and drag them in, that's a very easy way of doing it. But I don't know a way of doing it within Groove Agent. So, but you could do that as well and just use a direct offline processing. All right, so we had a question. Bass player was out of time, 1 beat out of 4, and what could you do to kind of fix that? So let's say, I had a bass part, and the timing was a little off. So it's like. So one thing that you could do very easily is just kind of, if you have a part that's a little bit out of time, is, you can just kind of cut. And then if you hold down on the Mac, it's Command Option. I think it's Control or Alt Control on Windows. Then you can just kind of slip the contents of the file itself. So if someone is a little out, you could just kind of take that one note and just move it. So that will kind of keep the audio file at the same point. But if you need that part of the file to be right where the cursor hits, you could slip the contents of the audio file using that. So cut kind of the beginning and the end, and just kind of you can slip the audio, kind of very easy to kind of place when one note is out of time. It's an easy way of doing that. All right, so a question: what's the best way to save all of your Cubase preferences and to transfer to another computer? For the vast majority will actually be done. You could just go to your profile manager and just simply export your profile. And then on the other computer, import your profile, restart, and all of your preferences would automatically be carried over. So that does, your different settings for, key commands, preferences, a number of different functions. If you have, your VST connections, all those different, most of the different functions will be carried over in a profile. So try that. And if there's probably still some stuff that could be more specific to that particular computer, and then you could go into, if you're on Windows, if you go to the Start menu, you could go to where you start Cubase, and there's a user settings and application data folder. On Mac, you could just go to your library folder, which you could go, if you go and hold down the Alt or Option key and go to library. And then you could go into preferences and see Cubase preferences here. And this could also, at that point, incorporate like your plugin collections. But try, I think, the intention is to kind of get just about everything over, is just go to your profile manager and export your profile. And then just put on like a thumb drive or email to yourself and just import that profile into your new system, and you should be all set. Okay, so we had a question how to chop up samples. So in 9.5, so let's say I have a drum loop here, and I wanted to chop up the sample. I could just double click on it, and we could launch it directly into our sample editor. I go to hit points. You could kind of determine the threshold of the hit points by adjusting this line here. So if you want that, and then really at this point, just click on create slices. And now you can have each of these events kind of sliced up for you. Let me see if I did that correctly. Yep. So now each of those events can be treated as independent files. I could erase just that easily. So do that again. Just within the sample editor, you double click, get a hit points, adjust your threshold, and then create slices. So I see a question, is it possible to download some of my Cubase sessions so you could kind of recreate? Some of the sessions I get are kind of copyrighted material that people allow me to use, but there's a couple that I might be able to upload somewhere. But if you let me know exactly kind of what you want to, which session you want, I might be able to kind of create one. If you go to the Steinberg download assistant, there's a great project that was done by Dom Sagalis, who whose work is based out of the UK, and it's a Cubase 9.5 demo project. So that's a great project to work with and kind of backward engineer if you wanted to get some great tips and tricks on production and stuff you could do in Cubase. So, but that's a great project to download and mess around with. So if you go to like the Steinberg download assistance, you'll see a Cubase 9.5 demo project or something like that. So download that. It's a great project to have just to listen to, and gives you a lot of different avenues to explore with Cubase. So I've seen comments about dragging, like different media, different, VST instruments directly from here. So if you go to your media, let's say we go to home, and being able to just kind of take instruments and currently works with Steinberg plugins. I'm not sure if it's specifically designed only to work with Steinberg plugins, or other plugins don't support it, but I think currently it doesn't work with other plugins, with third-party plugins. So I'll reiterate that again and see if it's something that could be done for that, but that's the current situation. But a lot of companies don't kind of keep up to date with all the functionality of their plugins that could limit stuff like that. All right, so I had a question on, can stereo channels be turned to mono? Um, it's not kind of probably the slickest implementation, but if you have just, so say I have a drum loop here, you can, I think if you go, if you wanted to just sound mono for purposes, you could use the the stereo expander plugin and kind of have that go negative. But I think if we go to, let's see if we could just access it here. Let's say I go to my kick loop and let's go to my pool. Then you could convert files. So say we'll just make it mono. And then that's just turned from stereo to mono, just like that. So if you have it, you could go directly to the pool. And then just right click to convert files. So so I'm seeing question, is there an estimated date when video will be available again in Cubase? It is available, just using kind of a new video engine, so you could play back, just import video files. What you can't do currently, so you could import the video files, is the replace audio in video file. I'm not sure when that's going to be implemented. I know it's being worked on. But you can import and score to videos. So, but to replace audio and video file, I don't have an ETA. I might be going to Germany in April for some meetings. So I may have a better idea at that point. But last I heard is they're still working on it. Okay, can we create a macro to trim start to cursor or trim? I think we could do that. Let me see if I can figure it out quickly. There you go. Just test this. So it looks like just Command L will do the beginning. So let me just see if that is. Let me just make sure it's not moving it. So I'm going to. So just Command L. Let me just select the file here. So it looks like the Command L, I'm not sure if that's a keyboard function that I've added, but it's. But try going directly here to and if that's not doing what you want, let me know, and I could work on creating a macro. I've done it before, but I think that might do what you want for the trim start. All right, so we have a question. What's the difference between an effects channel and using a group channel? And this is a question I get, and for some reason people can get kind of very angry about it. So some people will add a, let's say if I add an effects channel here, and let's say on this effects channel I wanted to have an insert. So let's say we just wanted to add a delay. And then let's say I wanted to add a group channel. And let's say I wanted to add the same delay. Okay, so people think, okay, this looks exactly the same. So when I go here to my sends, that I could send it to, you know, my group 3, which is going to the delay plugin, or I could do the same thing and I could send it to my effects send 1, which is going to my delay plugin. So, you know, people, you know, get very hostile about this. What's the difference? And it's, you know, effects sends are useless. But what you can do with an effects channel is, as soon as we kind of wanted to come here, we could go. So let's say if we wanted to actually look at our sends, we have the panning. So now when I go to this, you kind of have more panning options for the sends here. So it, you know, while the functionality will be very similar, you get more panning options and the ability for the effects channel to automatically pan with the panner as well. So that's one of the differences. So, but otherwise they're kind of very similar conceptually, just like they are on a mix console. All right, so we had a question on tempo detection. Excuse me, using when you have different takes on different lanes. So one of the things you could do is for your tempo track, so let's say if I had a tempo track, and one of the things that people often miss is you can have, as soon as you come here, you could add a new version. So let's say if I have a tempo track, we could use track versions. So let's say drummer did take one, and the tempo was kind of fluctuating a bit. So let's say our tempo was, let me just, okay, so let's say that's our tempo for take one. But, and what you could do is just simply come here and do a new track version, and each version you could have, for each version that you have in a lane, you can convert the lanes to track versions. So if you come here, you could just simply, take, create lanes from versions or create versions from lanes. And now we could just have the copy of the original tempo, so you could have different tempo maps or different tempo versions for each of the different takes that are in lanes if you wanted to. So that's what I would do. And then you could just simply cut, copy, paste with the different tempo settings and the different events as different track versions. So it gets to be pretty powerful when you start working like that. All right. So we're saying, is there, like with track, with quick controls, if there are other ways to add more quick controls? So let's say if we add like an audio track here, or I'll just select this audio track and we go to quick controls. Here you could actually have different kind of quick control presets. So while you have 8 quick controls, you could have different presets for like audio channels. And let's see if it's the same for virtual instruments. So, I think that you could just simply kind of come in here and save presets. So while you have 8 quick controls, you could have multiple presets of different quick controls. So that should allow you to have more than, we saw in the audio track, how you could just simply kind of come here. So if you have something set up, you could just simply, I believe, save it as a preset and then call that up for Pad Shop. So you could have more banks of 8 quick controls. All right, so seeing some comments about the mono to stereo and changing it on the mixer. And it's the one thing that I see a lot of people doing this for. And if there's a way to, so let's just go to just find something here real quick. Sorry, just looking for one particular file. Here we go. Sorry. So I often kind of get this misconception of people that, feel that they need to switch between mono and stereo to have mono or stereo effects. And it's really easy because, sometimes people think, oh, I want to switch it to a stereo track so I could have a stereo effect as an insert. But, it's really easy that, you could just add when you come here, let's say to a vocal, if it's a mono track, it's set up to be, my inserts will be mono based. Now, if I wanted to have stereo effects as well, I just literally just, come to my sends, and, sometimes people have a hard time just saying add effects channel send, right click, and let's add a stereo delay. So now and let me just adjust my delay times. So, a lot of people I talk to are just like, are trying to use inserts to be both like mono and stereo when needed, and sends, instead of using sends for stereo, inserts for the same channel configuration. So, I know some programs will allow you to kind of switch the channels between them, but I think this makes kind of a lot of sense. So using kind of the sends for your stereo send effects, I think, and if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know in the comments field. But it's a really easy way of kind of being able to use both appropriately. All right, so we had a question how to save like MIDI presets to be called up in other projects, and I think I'm not sure if this is for like an instrument like preset. Excuse me. So let's say I come here to retrolog. And I'll go ahead and just open up this instrument here. And let's say I've tweaked it. So now when I come here, I think I would just say preset, and we'll call it February hang. All right, so now, you know, when I go to my preset is just created, and it will just show up in any other project within the instrument. If I wanted to go to my media bay and say, okay, I was looking for my Feb hang preset. And I think it's probably under my user content. So, and then it's directly there. So that could be used in any other project just that easily. All right, so we had a question on how many direct routing. So we have 8 sources for your direct routing. And we had another question on how to EQ the lows and highs of a particular channel. So, you know, it's going to be different kind of for every source. But, you know, if you wanted to come here, we could go to the equalizer. Now let's do just... So I'll just take my vocal. So what's kind of cool about frequency is the EQ is you could actually just kind of EQ. And a lot of people will choose to kind of cut low end. And so if we're to bypass the EQ. So, and a lot of times, you know, it comes down to kind of using your ears. Now, one of the great things is if you know the particular key that you're in, you could actually just come here and say, I want to go to C5. And in the frequency, if you know like the musical key, just double click and say, okay, I want this EQ to be based at C5 or C7. C8. So that way you could kind of have the harmonic basis handled directly for the EQ. So I just read through comments. I see we'll get to some of the DC offset stuff pretty soon. All right, so see a comment about, telling Steinberg they need to merge Cubase and Nuendo products. A lot of the Nuendo functionality, is a lot of the Cubase functionality, all the 9.0 feature sets have been incorporated into Nuendo. So they're kind of merging it that way. Obviously, probably people want more Nuendo features at the Cubase price point. But, from dealing with a lot of Nuendo very specific customers who do, a majority of like game audio, and getting into, other aspects as ADR and sound design with randomizer. So there's a lot of very specific Nuendo functions that are really geared towards, particular markets that serve them very well that may not be as useful for a music production person that's using Cubase. So most of the Cubase functionality is in Nuendo, but obviously people probably want, a particular Nuendo feature in Cubase, and we see that happen often as time evolves. But, I think that there will still be two kind of distinct packages for different market segments. So seeing a question, is there a way to offset an aux channel, uh, like an effects channel in milliseconds? I'm not sure if there is. One of the things Cubase always does a really great job with is make sure all the delay compensation is working in effect. So I don't think there is, but I'll take a look. So it looks like if you have the, so the question was taking like an aux channel or like an effects channel and offsetting it. So here we have our effects channel for our delay. And if you go to the inspector, you could pan it and set volume, but it doesn't look like there's a way to shift it. What you could do as a method, and this is a workaround, is to duplicate a particular track. And so let's just right click, duplicate track. And if you wanted to send this duplicated track And then here we have the track delay functions. And then you could have that feed a particular effect if you wanted to. And then you could also just have it not routed to a particular bus if you wanted to feed a track, or if you want it routed to a track. But I don't know because we kind of paint ourselves at having true delay compensation throughout the entire signal path. So to kind of have a user be able to set it off is not ideal, but I can understand why you'd want to do it in particular situations. But so that's kind of a thing that you might be able to use as a workaround. So again, duplicate the track and send the second track, and you could adjust that. And this value here is in milliseconds for the track delay. So that's something to try. So we had a question: is there a way to have the phase switch to less than 180 degrees? I don't think any of the included functionality in Cubase does that, but there are a number of third-party plugins which can kind of go in between different phase relationships. I know some people will just simply slip the audio by manually to accomplish something very similar, but it's kind of inverted or not inverted in the current settings. So all right, so we had a question about using the transports on, I think, like a MIDI keyboard controller. And a lot of times, depending on, you might just have to, when you go into the studio setup, depending on the keyboard controller, not all of them just map directly correctly. So you might have to set up like a generic remote. So if you click on the plus sign, you could see a number of a lot of keyboard controllers may work as Mackie Control, or Mackie Huey is like some kind of protocol. But you could also just set up a generic remote. Let me see if I have one set up here. And the generic remote, you could have different functions set up that you could learn and say, when I press this button, play, rewind, fast forward, if it's not set up. But check to make sure that, it could be that the keyboard controller may have like a Cubase mode, depending on the controller, and make sure that you're in that, and that when you're working with it, you might have to, when you go to the studio setup here, just make sure that you have the MIDI input and output mapped correctly. So we had a question about snapping to, having a cursor snap to various grids. So if I come here, you can see if I have my snap set to bar and I click here, that it's automatically going to snap to the bar, to the closest bar. So, or if I wanted to snap to the closest beat. So as you kind of click here with the cursor, And even if you hold down like Alt Shift and click, it'll snap. It'll follow the snap settings. I'm just reading through some comments. Just bear with me 1 second. All right, so we had a question kind of sent in about DC offset. So let's go take a look at WaveLab to kind of show this. And DC offset is always something that's kind of interesting to deal with. So, and it's something a lot of mastering engineers do. I had a friend who found kind of a really, he's a blind mastering engineer, has kind of very golden ears. And I think it was an Adele track from her last album. He found had a lot of DC offset that he immediately kind of eliminated. And sometimes DC offset is actual direct current that could be in the signal. And, it could actually make sure that sometimes you don't ever have a actual zero crossing. So you could sometimes, if you were to think of, instead of it having a zero crossing, it would actually kind of be like this waveform kind of shifted up or down as a result of DC offset. So I just went through some different files that people had given me. And sometimes DC offset could be caused by electrical wiring, wiring in microphones, or, analog circuits. And you could actually very easily find DC offset by going to if we just kind of look at this here, and let's go to and we could do this in WaveLab, and we could also in Cubase do our remove DC offset, but we'll kind of show you an example here. So let's do a global analysis of this file. So we'll analyze it, and here we found 0.4097% of DC offset in the left channel, 0.3493. So what I've done is I took this file and I removed DC offset with this particular file, and then I took another file and then saved it. So now what I want to do is go into an audio file comparator, and we're going to actually take the one file and then the one file that had the removed DC offset, and we're going to generate kind of a delta file. So often DC offset can show up, you could see it sometimes as almost like very, very low frequency information. So sometimes when you see a wave file, like on a Fourier analysis like this, and you see kind of like near 0 hertz, you see a lot of activity, that could be indicative of DC offset is present. And this could take a lot of energy because often speakers and amplifiers are trying to recreate that information. So it could really kind of muddy up your monitoring. So let's go back to our audio file comparator, and we'll do the two files, and it's going to generate a delta file between the two. Okay, so it found, 1.6 million differences between the two files. Okay, so, and now what we want to do is I'm just going to add more gain. So I want to, so this is kind of what DC offset can look like. So this is, again, taking the original file and just kind of, and removing the DC offset. We can now kind of listen to what was kind of added in and this is kind of boosted by 48 dB. So all those are kind of like those different artifacts are kind of attributed to DC offset. So, and if you wanted to remove it inside of Cubase, all you'd really have to do is to just kind of, select an audio file. And then one of the processes to do is when you just kind of come here to your processes, and then you'll see remove DC offset. So it's a good rule of thumb before, you do your mixdown file to always remove DC offset. It's something that a lot of people don't think of, and I know seasoned mastering engineers that just completely overlook it and have like weird low end stuff, energy going on that they can't quite figure out, and it's sometimes just could be a microphone cable that during the recording that caused it, or a synthesizer filter that could create those types of issues. So that's kind of how to manage some DC offset inside of Cubase. We had another question sent in regarding someone wanting to take a MIDI track that had a continuous controller of 110, and this was to kind of shut off for live performance use, and they needed to turn that into MIDI controller 112. So we'll just add a MIDI track. So I'll just kind of flip these around here. Okay, so I'm just going to add a quick MIDI part with some controller data. And let's say we just wanted to come here. And in their case, they had 110. I'll just do, for example, we'll just put in, let's say, some modulation. So CC1. The principle will be the same. So let's say I want to turn this modulation data into expression for working with a string library. So you can see that now I'm going to have no expression data. I have modulation data. So I wanted to be able to take kind of the notes of this particular part and turn the modulation into a different controller. So to do this, we'll go to our MIDI, and then we'll go to our logical editor. See if I open it up correctly. All right, so I want to say what we want to do is to transform then I can say type is equal to controller. And the value one of the controller is the controller message. So, and what I want to do is say value one, I wanted to add. So to go from 110 to 112, I would add a parameter of 2. So in this case, going from modulation to expression, I wanted to add 10 because we're going from controller 1 to controller 11. And we're going to choose to transform. So if I wanted to now have that selected, I click apply. We'll see our modulation data turned into expression data. Just like that. Now, if I wanted to insert, or basically copy, but maintain my controller 1 and still have controller 11 mimic the same values, in the function I would switch this to insert. And then it's going to just be mimicked. Or if you choose copy, at this point you could just kind of click on apply. And now this track only has controller 11 on it. So that way I could just extract that. So again, we want to, if you wanted to change just the value, you choose transform, figure out the difference between the two different controller numbers. So in this case, 1 to 11, and add or subtract. Or if you wanted to insert, just simply select insert, and then you could have kind of the same functionality directly there and copy that and still keep your modulation data. So those are some really handy uses of the logical editor for doing that type of work. All right, so I got to see question. Set up the control room for doing if we're doing comparisons, and now your metronome isn't functioning. It could be that, you know, make sure this, you may have done this obviously. Make sure that in the control room that you have the metronome active here. This is something where a lot of people don't think of doing. And it could also be when you go to the different control rooms that in each headphone mix, so if you set up like a Q mix or kind of as an alternate monitoring path, you could just deactivate the headphones for each Q mix. So make sure that, you know, that, you know, when you do that, that within the Q mix has its own headphone or metronome control, and that's independent of the metronome for the control room itself, kind of globally. So this is kind of what you're hearing in your control room, and this is what's being heard on the mix. So if you switch here to say Q mix 1, which is our vocal, then the metronome could disappear if this isn't turned on. So check that, and I think you'll probably find your answer there. All right, so just reading through some comments, and we had some other questions sent in. All right, so we had a question emailed in about kind of transferring the plugin manager settings. So someone went through and did all of their VST plugin management. So they made different presets for exactly how they wanted their plugins to be, and then when they upgraded, it didn't carry over. This is one of the things that's included within the profile manager. So if you go to your profile manager, your plugins will be collected there. So your plugin collection, if you wanted to just manually copy the file over, and again, it's just going to be in your preferences. So and it's going to be a different location on Windows. So, but you could look it up. So if we go here to your library, and then you'll see just a plugin manager. XML file. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. So this plugin manager XML file. So what you could do is copy this from the preferences from Cubase 9. So if you go to Cubase 9 and copy it into the same location as in Cubase 9.5, so you can manually replace that, and then you could be all then all the plugin collections that you set up will automatically be carried over for you. All right, so we had a question where someone wanted to set up like an XY axis for doing effects. So let's say if we have, I'll just find a quick drum loop again. Okay, so let's say I have this as my drum loop, and someone wanted to have kind of an XY controller for their reverb ascend. I saw it in another video, so it has to be okay to do it from. So what we want to do is I want to set up just a, you can set up a quadraphonic output if you wanted to. So if you go to your audio connections here and go to outputs, I'll just set up a quick quad output, and then I can just add an effects channel track. And I'll just have this go into like a reverb. And instead of it being stereo, I want it to be quad. So now what I want to do is to take that quadraphonic, and I probably need to send this out for my reverb return. And as I come here, let's say I open up this particular channel. And let's go to my revelation. So now if you wanted to, let's just play back that particular clip here. should be. Not sure why I'm not hearing it now. Let me just. Oh well. But and then really all you'd have to do to kind of go between wet and dry is you could just kind of move your position like this if you wanted to. I'm not sure if it gives you that much more than just a wet dry ratio on your send, but you know it'll do that over an XY axis as well, so you can do panning. All right, so we had a question about setting up like multi-track presets. So let's just come here. I'll just remove these. So let's say I have eight mono tracks. All right, we'll go to our mix console and I'll take these 8 tracks. And we'll add a group channel to the selected channels. And we'll make it a stereo group. So the question was how to save all of these. So if you kind of come here, and if you wanted to import it into another project, is you could just export these as selected tracks. So we'll call this February Hang. I'll just sort to my desktop. So at this point, I want to let's do just a blank project. And this would work for your effect sends that were sent as well. And now we want to import track archive. So it's export selected tracks, import track archive. So that could be a little confusing terminology, but here is our February Hang XML. And we'll see all these. And at this point, we'll just come right there. And now they're all set up. All the routing is to the group or to the effect send. So very easy to save your multi-track. You know, this is my favorite drum setup. This is my favorite piano mic technique. All right, we also had a question relating to chord pads. And sometimes if we have different instruments, so let's say if I had a Hallian Sonic SE, so I'll just drag this over here. And let's say if we had a copy of Groove Agent, and then when using the chord pads, and both of these were armed for recording, that we would, let me just make sure my control room is set up. That's why I wasn't hearing, sorry, before. That when they trigger the chord pads, that it was triggering the drums as well, which wasn't intended. This is kind of a global MIDI out, so you just will have to bypass and turn off record enable for just the drum part. So even if it's set, that will kind of send it globally to any particular track that's record enabled. So you're going to hear both the drums. I can understand why that could be frustrating, but it does make kind of a logical sense at some point as well. All right, we had someone that wanted to know a way to, if there was a number of different tracks. Let's say I had these particular tracks in a folder, and they're watching a video on the Yamaha Nuage. So if we have these in a particular folder, let's say I'll just move these tracks to a particular folder, and let me add some more audio tracks here. Okay, so what the person wanted to do is to only see what was in a particular folder track. So if you go to the visibility tab, we could uncheck like, you know, groups or individual files. But if you hold down the shift key and select just the folder, that will show only tracks that are in a particular folder. So again, you can just come here. So say I wanted to see only these particular tracks that are in a folder. So I could right click here. So if I only want to see these, just click on the shift key outside of the folder, and then you could hide that. Or again, I just wanted to see only these particular ones. And that way you could kind of selectively choose, and you could save them as presets if you wanted to, or just simply say show all tracks. So we had a question, will I ever do just a live broadcast kind of from soup to nuts, like full creation? I'm not really a songwriter, so you probably wouldn't want to listen to it. But, you know, it could be, you know, difficult to cover every aspect. But if you know, maybe we could work on doing something kind of from start to finish, but, you know, it could be so detailed in the little minutia of it that it may be a little lacking. All right. Then our question was working, should, you know, in Cubase record you're working with machine to record directly from to import like stems that were created machine into Cubase, or to record it into Cubase. I haven't really worked with machine in that way. So you know, as long as the files end up in Cubase, I think you're probably going to be in a better spot because of the audio engine inside of Cubase. So I think you're going to be better off there. I'm not sure if there's going to be a difference between recording or importing the stems. And our question was like how to use the machine hardware just inside of Cubase. It just works as a standard MIDI controller. So if you have a Groove Agent track here, so let's say we have Groove Agent, all you'd have to do is just set your MIDI input, you know, just arm the track for Groove Agent, and then just, you know, start hitting pads on your machine, and you could see it should be incorporated within the all MIDI inputs, or you could actually just select your machine MIDI driver directly there, and you should be all set with that. Just reading through a couple comments before we wrap up. If anyone has a last minute question, before we get wrapped up. If you want to just start firing those off, because we've gone a little over 3 hours already, and we'll start wrapping up. I have to go pick up my son from school. But if you have a quick question, I'll read through some of the comments that come in the last couple minutes. So I see a question on implementing the OSC protocol. I haven't heard of anything, but I will see if I can get an answer on that within Cubase. So just seeing questions, still regarding the audio pool. So if you want to perhaps send me a project, I'd be happy to take a look at your pool window if you want to put on like a Dropbox or something like that. But you could send me a link if you upload it somewhere to Club Cubase at steinberg.net. All right, we'll see if there's any last minute questions that kind of sneak in. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. All right, and I guess we'll see if there's any last minute questions. So I see a question about, I have an edits folder that was created, and what is it about? So the edits, when you do an audio offline process, it keeps the original file, and the process file goes into the edits folder. So if you once you go to the direct offline processing, I would always keep them unless you're like really, very tight on hard drive space. But if you have a particular process, one of the things that you can do is, let me just, and you've done a process on it, and you could just kind of right click here, and then you could say make all permanent, and that will delete the edits folder for you. I like to have the flexibility to always go back if need be. So, but if you want to get rid of the edits folder, again, those are like, because it stores the original audio file and it has a processed audio file, and it simply works back and forth between the two to kind of, allow you to selectively undo a particular process or plugin afterwards. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for wonderful questions and a great hangout. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick, and that it's been helpful. If you like the video, the hangout, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you get notified. Also, if anyone wants to, as they're watching it back, if you watch it a second time, wants to keep notes of different topics that were covered, that'd be helpful, so we can have an index of the hangout. So that would be really helpful. So thanks again. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time, probably early next month. Take care.